Hi everyone, and welcome to Truth Over News. What if I were to tell you that you could work for an employer where your chances of being fired were essentially zero? A place where you're rewarded not for performance or excellence or even results, but simply for showing up when you feel like it. An employer of more than 2 million people, so benevolent that it only fires 4,000 employees in the average year. That's a rate of 2 people per 1,000 individuals, or 0.2%, 20 times lower than the recent and historically low rate of 4% for American companies. Now consider the ramifications on employee behavior and the types of employees that policy attracts. How hard would you work if no matter how poorly you performed, you had virtually no chance of being fired? Of course, we're talking about our nation's largest employer, the federal government. A government typified by their complete inability to fire employees for poor performance or outright incompetence. As it turns out, the New York Times would have you believe that this is a good thing, that having totally unaccountable federal bureaucrats who can't be fired is somehow good for democracy. In an article menacingly titled "Trump and Allies Forge Plans to Increase Presidential Power in 2025, the Times claims that Trump and his backers aim to strengthen the power of the White House and limit the independence of federal agencies, reshaping the structure of the executive branch to concentrate far greater authority directly in his hands. As they put it, to alter the balance of power by increasing the president's authority over every part of the federal government that now operates with any measure of independence from political interference by the White House. The Times felt so strongly about this issue that it elected to make the article available to everyone through what they called a free link. On one count, the New York Times is right. Trump does intend to engage in a desperately needed overhaul of the federal government. He says so almost daily and has many of his plans right on his website. What the Times fails to tell you is why this is so desperately needed. And of course, they hide everything behind mischaracterizations and threats of a menacing power grab by Trump. The Times also completely and predictably ignores the ongoing quest and unilateral grab for power by the Biden regime, an administration that was recently subject to a court injunction for its efforts to censor the free speech of Americans through control of social media. Acts so egregious that federal judge Terry Doughty described what had been done by the government as arguably the most massive attack against free speech in United States history. On these events, the collective memory of the New York Times, unsurprisingly, got a bit hazy. The Times feverishly warned that Trump intends to strip employment protections from tens of thousands of career civil servants. Of course, the Times doesn't tell you that the vast majority of Americans don't have these employment protections. Only the career civil servants that comprise the deep state enjoy these types of benefits. The Times also stays far away from the matter of statistics, failing to tell you that the actual termination rate for federal employees is really about 0.2%. 20 times less than the current average termination rate of 3.8% for American companies. And that rate is already well below the long-run average rate of more than 6%. There's a reason for this ridiculously low federal termination rate. According to a 2019 Merit Systems Protection Board research brief, only 41% of federal supervisors were confident they could actually remove an employee for serious misconduct, and only 26% were confident they could do so for poor performance. Folks may be surprised to find out just how hard it is to actually fire a federal employee. Although the laughable 0.2% rate, that's 0.002, and low confidence level of federal employee supervisors does provide some insight. The actual process to fire a federal employee is very costly and can take 18 months or longer. And even then, employees can file an appeal with the Merit Systems Protection Board, the agency created by the Civil Service Reform Act. Employees are allowed 2 appeals. The first takes at least 3 months. The second appeal takes 9 months or more. So, in order to fire a federal employee, a supervisor must be willing to take action that's politically frowned upon, endure financial costs and lawsuits, wait as long as 2.5 years, and open themselves up to review from the Merit Systems Protection Board. As noted by an older General Accounting Office study, The process for dismissing an employee after the probationary period ends can be complex and lengthy. As the report notes, the probationary period for individuals entering the federal service is the ideal time to remove those who cannot do the work required of the position. Effectively addressing poor performance has been a long-standing government-wide challenge. Now, this is from the government itself. The net effect of all this is that federal workers are almost never fired for poor performance. Virtually all of the actual firings come from real misconduct or from federal employees in their probationary first year. Once a federal employee makes it past their initial probationary year, they are far more likely to die in their job than they are to get fired or laid off. In the case of a problem employee, the better answer seems to be to ignore, transfer, or promote the problem employee away. Stephen Moore, a distinguished fellow in economics at the Heritage Foundation, described an example from his time in federal government. According to Moore, a secretary who showed up about half the time was surly and vindictive when she was called out for her behavior. To retaliate against anyone who called her out, she would put the files out of order. Moore said the woman literally could not be fired because she would slap the agency with a lawsuit. In order to rid themselves of the problem, Moore's department moved her upstairs where she got a promotion. Federal employees have a sweet deal. As Moore notes, you cannot get people to leave with a crowbar. The pay in many federal agencies is well above $100,000. The benefits are about 30% higher than comparable private sector jobs. The cherry on top of this taxpayer sundae is 99.8% job security. The total inability to fire federal workers came into existence through two acts, the Pendleton Act and the Civil Service Reform Act. Both acts were intended to help ensure that merit, rather than partisan favors or personal favoritism, determined who was employed within the federal bureaucracy. The Pendleton Act led to the creation of the Civil Service Commission, which created a series of examinations, civil service exams, to ensure that political favoritism was removed from the system. The Pendleton Act covered the hiring of federal employees, but not their firing. In 1897, President McKinley issued an executive order that federal employees could only be fired for just cause. Procedural protections were also strengthened, and the Civil Service Commission created an administrative review system, and thus a new bureaucracy was born. In 1978, in response to increased union presence and allegations of improper handling of racial and sexual discrimination, Congress enacted the Civil Service Reform Act. This act provided for a merit system of hiring. It also created a bureaucratic monstrosity. The Civil Service Commission was divided into the Office of Personnel Management, a new executive-level agency, and the Merit Systems Protection Board, which handles employee appeals. Additionally, the Federal Labor Relations Authority was created to oversee unionized federal employees. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, founded in 1965, was given jurisdiction over implementation and enforcement of anti-discrimination law. A large bureaucracy was now rendered monolithic. Initially, only 10% of federal positions were covered by the Pendleton Act. By 1919, 70% of positions were covered. Today, well over 90% of federal employees are covered under the Pendleton Act.